Seeking Daylight Part 1 Journey to the Underhill Gates. Narrated by Million Quinteros. Chapter 7 Here Nor There. Deep below Old Hinsdale Academy, the cold and dark of the underground nearly swallowed the three classmates whole as they stood hunched, toiling over the riddle that Lewis had scribbled into the dirt at his feet. He tapped his walking stick into the ground in a frustrated twitch. We must have been here for hours now. They were trapped, and everything they had tried so far had done little more than make the three of them grow tired, weary, and hungry. Studying the words over and over had certainly not done much to aid them in solving the riddle. Rather, as the minutes ticked by, the words seemed only to be taunting them. My life can be measured in hours. I serve by being devoured. Thin, I am quick. Fat, I am slow. Wind is my foe. It seemed a simple enough puzzle at first glance. After all, Lewis had spent countless hours working through riddles like this while sitting at the kitchen table with his grandpa Andy for as long as he could remember. He had always considered himself to be quite good at them. Of course, the worst that could happen if he had gotten one wrong was his grandfather smirking in his direction before he gave an encouraging, "Try again." Who was to know what their fate might be if they guessed incorrectly this time? Owen was sitting on the ground a few steps away from the others, nodding off, with his back propped just next to where they'd found the giant circular carving. Sophie sat cross-legged, looking at the words written into the dirt, upside down and across from where Lewis was standing. She began scratching something onto the ground with her index finger, stopping only briefly to tuck her shoulder-length hair behind her ear or to rub her chin inquisitively before scratching something else. "Have you got something?" Lewis asked, moving behind her to get a better look. "Not really," she sighed. "I was just trying to figure out each line, one at a time. Maybe something will stand out or connect them. I don't know, maybe that's stupid." "Well, let's see. What have you got so far?" Lewis was curious and a little upset with himself that he had not come up with a strategy sooner himself. Sophie got to her feet and moved beside Lewis, where they could both see more clearly what she had been working on. Next to the first line, "My life can be measured in hours," she had scribbled the words day and night. Adjacent to the second line, "I serve by being devoured," was written food, water, firewood. Next, Sophie had drawn a line in the dirt floor connecting the two lines of the riddle. Thin I am quick, and fat I am slow. Beside which was written person, animal. Lastly was, wind is my foe. Sophie had scribbled the words fire and candle next to it in her neat, bubbled handwriting. Seeing it laid out in this fashion gave Lewis a new perspective from which his mind could get to work on solving the riddle. The words he had been staring blankly at for the past hour somehow looked new to him, giving him a jolt of inspiration. His gaze moved quickly between the lines of the clue and then to what Sophie had scribbled beside them. He did so until the candle he had been holding was all but burnt down to just a stub, its light dimming to where it became very difficult to see much of anything at all. Lewis reached into his pack for a fresh one, and then to his pocket for his Zippo to light it. The candle's small wick took to the flame, and the small blue glow expanded to a bright red and white light. "Of course!" Sophie pulled the candle from Lewis's hand and ran the 3 or so steps it took to reach the carved wall, where Owen seemed to have dozed off completely. He was snoring and did not even stir as she kicked up dust just beside him. "I know I felt something here somewhere." Sophie waved the candle from spot to spot on the large circular carving in the wall so she could see. She placed her hands into each of the 4 small holes that had been cut through to the other side. First the lowest of the holes, then the 2 at the sides, and eye level to her. Then, on her tippy toes, she reached over her head and felt inside the highest of the holes. "Here it is!" She reached upward with the candle and slipped it into a space at the bottom of the hole that seemed to have been carved just for that particular purpose. At first, nothing happened, but as Lewis and Sophie stood watching, they could see that something was causing the flame to spread upward, illuminating the wall from behind, a bit of the light shining through the small cracks or holes in the stone, barely noticeable before. It glowed a deep orange, and the smell of smoke filled their noses. Something was burning, but what? Just then, there was a rather loud snap. The sound was coming from above them. click, 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 click. The circular carving in the wall began to very slowly turn clockwise. In fact, it was not a carving in the wall at all, but rather appeared as an entirely separate piece as it spun in place. The candle slowly tilted to the right, finally stopping, along with a clicking sound, at about a 45-degree angle from where it had began. Thud! A cloth bag attached to a rope stretching upward, filled with perhaps stone or dirt to give it heft, slammed to the ground just beside where Owen had been resting his eyes. This prompted a deep-toned, "Whoa!" as his eyes shot open and he rolled away from where it had landed, climbing to his feet and joining the others. There they all now stood, together, staring as the candle began to light another area behind the wall. There was the smell of smoke again. The three slowly backed away from the wall and glanced upward, cautious of things falling from the sky. Bang! The sound was coming from above and to their left. There were no accompanying gear-like clicks this time, as the giant stone disc now spun noticeably quicker than it had previously, moving in a counterclockwise direction. There was only the sound of stone grinding against stone, until it eventually stopped with the candle having now moved past its original 12 o'clock position and tilting to the left at a 45-degree angle. Just as it found its resting point, there was one pronounced clunk, like a giant lock finding its next position. Thwap! A bundle of 4 heavy stone-filled cloth bags, each at least twice the size of the first, landed just to the left of where the three had been standing. A billow of dust from where it had landed on the dirt floor got into their eyes. The attached rope must have been pulling against a gear or mechanism of some type, causing the disc to spin, Lewis thought. The candle had found something else to set fire to once again. This time the flame spread quickly behind the stone and shined through the small pin-sized holes and cracks until the entire circular object was glowing a bright orange, smoke exiting through all 4 of the openings that had been cut through to the other side. Boom! Quite all of a sudden, the glow was gone. Their eyes remained trained on the only remaining light, the small flicker of the candle. It began to rotate again, back to the right and clockwise. It spun slowly at first, then quicker, making a full circle, then another and another. Each a bit quicker than the last, until finally the trail of light emanating from the candle's small flame was making a nearly constant and spinning circular glow before their eyes. The round stone object seemed to be receding inward as it spun, like a giant screw boring its way deeper into the surface of the wall, until finally it stopped, just for a moment, and slowly tilted away from them. It fell to the ground with a cloud of dust and a thunderous thump, echoing against the cavern wall and revealing a passageway that appeared to enter into an adjoining room. The three stood huddled as Lewis glared upward for fear of what might fall from the sky this go-round. Sophie made a step toward the opening, but something felt wrong in Lewis's gut. From the corner of his eye, he glimpsed something falling from their right. He grabbed her by the shoulders and pulled her backward to the ground. Whoosh! An enormous boulder, at least twice the size of the 3 of them combined, swung past the opening like a giant pendulum, disappearing in the darkness to their left. Its force produced a gust of cool air as it passed just in front of where Sophie had fallen, blowing her hair into her eyes and scaring her backward and back to her feet. Whoosh! It swung back past the opening again. This time Owen was ready, running through the passage as it passed and turning quickly back toward the others. Come on! Come on! He frantically waved for them to follow. As Sophie readied herself to make an attempt, Lewis clenched the back of her shirt in his fist, only letting it go just as the giant pendulum made its third pass back past the opening. Now, go! He gave her an encouraging push toward Owen. She scampered through unscathed, caught and pulled to safety by Owen's outstretched arms. The pendulum swung by again, far quicker this time than the last. Gravity was seemingly pulling it toward its final resting place in front of the opening. Lewis flinched and stopped himself as it passed by again. Hurry! Yelled the others as they both wildly waved their arms for him to run their way. Lewis gathered himself and took one step backward. It was all the time he had before the boulder swung by the opening again. He ran toward them, but his first step slid in the sand at his feet, causing him to stumble and to nearly drop his backpack. His second step found solid ground and he pushed off with all his strength, diving head first in the direction of his friends and bracing himself for the oncoming collision with the pendulum. Time seemed to slow as he imagined the crushing blow, but all he felt was his outstretched arms hitting the others as he flew to safety, followed by the wind created by the huge stone as it swung again past his feet. The collision toppled Owen, and the two rolled to their backs beside one another atop the stone disc that now lay beneath them on the ground, their eyes still clinched shut. The boulder swung by the opening again and again, with less time between each pass. The three of them now watched from the other side of the passage, patting themselves and checking that all of their limbs were still intact. It swung past only a handful of times more, until it found its final resting place, blocking the opening completely. It was eerily quiet. Owen and Lewis got to their feet and gave the giant stone a push, but it was far too heavy for either of them to budge. They had but only one direction to travel now, deeper still into the underground. The chamber they had found themselves in was even cooler than the last, and nearly entirely cloaked in darkness. The only light was a familiar greenish glow emanating from quite some ways off. The source of the light was hidden by a gradual hill stretching outward and into the distance. Lewis rummaged through his backpack and lit 3 more candles, handing Owen his first and then giving one to Sophie, throwing her a smile. Perhaps she would be of far more help to their expedition than he had first given her credit for. She gave him a small smile back and again tucked her long hair behind her ear as she turned toward their new destination. He should have been scared senseless. They had no food, no direction other than toward this ominous green light. They were cold, tired, and surrounded by the oddest of circumstances. Yet, in the place of fear, he had found only an unexplainable sense of purpose in what they were doing. Each of them had in their own way. As they pressed forward and upward, their conversation was spirited and their mood oddly light. They could count on one another, it seemed, and that was something to build from. Together they would find their way from this mess one way or another. Or so they tried to convince themselves aloud. Can't wait to find out what happens next? No problem. You can grab the first 2 complete books now for free by visiting pjowen.com/free.